I know you.
Cancelled.
Hello, I'm the Radical Reviewer, and I'm here to talk to you about canceling. Yep, that's right, look what the me dragged in. More content about canceling. Australia is on fire, presidential elections are going on, economic crises on the horizon, and I'm here to be like the 30th bread tuber to talk about canceling. Get out your punch cards, punch that last stamp, and get yourself a free sub sandwich. You're welcome. Well, actually, I'd like to think I'm here to talk about canceling in a way that's missing from our discourse. Now, canceling is a complex subject with a lot of different angles, so first let's look at some things that I'm not talking about. Backbiting. Well, this isn't my first taste with the subject of canceling. I first discussed this in my video on backbiting, which came out 21 months ago. Yeah, that's right. My videos are my babies, and I count their age in months. Anyway, at the time of making that video, I wasn't really referring to the discussion around online canceling, but rather about how leftist infighting makes the left unappealing to outsiders, and how gatekeeping and purity testing culture often favors college-educated folks who are up-to-date on all the hippest lingo at the expense of and ostracization of the uninitiated, predominantly working-class folks. The idea for that video came to me after thinking about these two quotes.
There's a tendency of urban people to look down and consider the timber workers stupid, to talk down to them, to things like that. I've heard a 21-year-old college student say to a 45-year-old logger, "Do you know what biodiversity is?" And, you know, if you do that, that's the end of the conversation.
We say to people, come join us, risk your relations with your parents, risk your relations with some friends, risk your future job, no longer enjoy television, no longer enjoy movies, no longer be able to conduct yourself freely and in a relaxed fashion because everybody's going to criticize everything that you do. You may well have a less emotional engagements, less deep friendships than before. It's distinctly possible. Come join us. And what will we give you for all of that? Long meetings and backbiting. And a set of standards by which you feel that every time you try and do something, you fail. And we wonder why we're not growing.
Although this is an important conversation, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Mainstream versus infighting. Another interesting concept I'm not talking about today is the spectrum between mainstream apolitical media canceling, that which is covered in the Some More News video, and the leftist infighting canceling that's discussed in the ContraPoints video. If you're watching this video, you've probably already seen those other videos, but they're awesome. More about those later. Interesting stuff, but again, not what we're here to talk about today. Tactical unity. I recently tweeted in support of leftists who are often considered canceled, and I framed my support of them as we must be pragmatic due to the threats we face, and I pointed to people who are reactionary or transphobic as examples. But this is about positive tactical unity versus negative tactical unity. There is an interesting discussion to be had here. Like, tactical unity in response to a threat means abandoning that unity once the threat is gone. A better rationale would be positive tactical unity. Like, I support ContraPoints despite being further left than her, not because the current threats we face, and that I'd stop supporting her as soon as those threats are gone, but rather my support is in regards to her positive effects. Like, if Bernie wins and we have a huge shift in the Overton window, I would still support Contra because my support isn't a response to threats, but rather a response to her positive effects. But again, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Okay, so what the hell are we here to talk about? No, today I'm here to discuss the effectiveness of specifically leftist purity testing gatekeeping type canceling, and discuss its effectiveness by comparing IRL in real life canceling to online canceling. Let's dig in. IRL canceling. I think a way to illuminate the difficulties, struggles, and problems with online canceling is to look at some of the examples of IRL canceling and find where the difficulties, struggles, problems, and differences are in those incidences. So, in a few videos, I mentioned that I spent a few years working at a homeless shelter. Well, here's a story from that time in my life. Once, a friend of mine who worked there was working their overnight shift. This involved sitting at a desk, overseeing some 30 sleeping people, occasionally getting up to transfer loads of guests' laundry, and waiting to wake up the next overnight staff member and switch out with them and get some sleep. On one particular night, my friend made her way towards the bathrooms, and a guest was standing there, exposing himself and masturbating. Other staff members were awakened, and a decision had to be made. They could call the cops and explain what happened, and the guest would be arrested and probably charged with indecent exposure or public indecency or something. After all, they did commit a crime. But this is a tough call to make. The staff want to help the guests, not ruin their lives further. And the staff aren't medical experts. There's no way to tell if this guest's actions were the result of undiagnosed or untreated mental illness, or if they were high on some kind of drug, or what. And at the very least, the shelter doesn't want a reputation for calling the cops on guests and having them hauled off to jail. The guest could be kicked out of the shelter for clear violation of the rules and perhaps receive a permanent ban. It would suck to be put out in the cold in the middle of the night, but that's the consequences of their actions. The guest could be kicked out with a temporary ban. That was a pretty standard punishment for infractions like drug use or fighting. Or perhaps the guest could just be allowed to stay. The staff are working at a homeless shelter, many of them volunteers, and they're certainly compassionate to the struggles that tend to accompany homelessness. Histories of abuse, sexual frustration, undiagnosed and untreated mental illnesses, neuroatypicality, drug addiction, and all kinds of stuff like that. And that's to say nothing for my friend, the victim of this event. Would they get paid leave and have any needed counseling paid for by the shelter? No, not likely. This was a perpetually strapped for cash homeless shelter. Would they be sent home and another staff member obligated to finish their shift? Perhaps. Would policies change so that overnight shifts would have 2 staff members awake during each shift? No, I doubt it. The shelter probably couldn't afford that either. Would the shelter just shrug their shoulders? There is some assumed risk involved with working at a homeless shelter. Perhaps the shelter would just argue that it was my friend's responsibility to assess the risk involved with working at a homeless shelter. Now, the correct answer to these options may seem obvious to you. Maybe the other options seem totally abhorrent, but for those involved, this was a real moral and ethical conundrum. Even in this concrete case of victim and victimizer, solutions are difficult. Let's look at another example. Once I played a show, and the headlining group was a band on tour. The touring band stayed at my friend's house. This friend is known for hosting touring bands. Emma from She, Her, Hers stays there when she's in town. John from Rent Strike, who we spoke to recently, he stays there when he's in town. And on this particular occasion, the touring band's lead singer, who was staying at my friend's house, got very drunk. And as people were falling asleep, he began flirting with a woman who was at the house, and saying that his sleeping girlfriend wouldn't mind if they hooked up. She said no. He climbed on top of her anyway, and she yelled, "Get the fuck off me," and a bunch of people were woken up. Now, what to do? They could call the cops and have this guy arrested, but perhaps this would totally wreck that person's life. Perhaps, just like with the shelter example, you don't want to be known as the place that invites people to spend the night and then turns around and calls the cops on them. They could call the other venues along his tour and warn them of his inappropriate behavior, perhaps canceling his tour and obligating him to go home. perhaps costing him a bunch of money and exposure, and perhaps ruining his band's reputation. All pretty damning blows for a career musician. They could kick him out and tell him he has to find some place else to stay for the night. And they could tell the guy that they have an eye on him and he better not pull any more shit, but let him stay, and that he better leave in the morning and be happy when he's gone. And again, this only speaks for the victimizer. Addressing the victim, again, is a whole nother story. Let's look at one more example. I once played a show at a venue, and it turned out later that month the band The Mentors was going to play a show at that venue. For the uninitiated, the band The Mentors is a self-described rape rock band who wears executioner's garb and sings songs about brutally murdering and raping people. My friend's band, who played the show that I played, asked the venue to cancel the Mentors show, and went around telling other folks to boycott the venue and pressure them to cancel the Mentors show. In response, the venue went around telling other venues to blacklist my friend's band, telling other venues that they will use your stage and take your money and turn around and slander your venue after the fact. Now, what should be done? Should the venue be boycotted? Should the band be blacklisted? Sure, the Mentors have free speech to sing about whatever they want, but isn't my friend's band's ability to levy criticism also within their free speech? Now, all of these examples are very different from online canceling. What is online canceling?
Canceling is online shaming, vilifying, and ostracizing of prominent members of a community by other members of that community.
Now, I don't really have a lot to add on this subject. As I alluded to earlier, the Some More News and ContraPoints videos basically say all that needs to be said about the issue. Let's watch an instructional video to learn more.
Moralism or intellectualism provide a phony pretext for the call-out. You can pretend you just want an apology. You can pretend you're just a concerned citizen who wants the person to improve. You can pretend you're simply offering up criticism when what you're really doing is attacking a person's career and reputation out of spite, envy, revenge. I mean, it could be any motivation.
Public shaming can really get out of hand. Social media, digital photos, better record keeping, and the internet in general have created a situation where everyone's past is going to be painfully available. And as millennials grow older, we'll have to figure out how to deal with that and what the forgiveness process will be. It's extremely complicated and distressing to think about.
How can you tell the difference between a trans anarcho-socialist with an anime avatar and a Nazi pretending to be a trans anarcho-socialist with an anime avatar? Well, you can't.
Okay, so I'm discussing leftist IRL canceling versus leftist online canceling. There are a few things that make all of these IRL cases of canceling very, very different from online cases. To cancel or not to cancel. In these IRL cases, supporting versus canceling has tangible implications. Less so online. There are many ways that you can engage with an online person that falls outside of canceling or support. I didn't go to that Mentors show, and I never bought their songs, but I have downloaded them for free. I'm a subscriber to PragerU, not because I support them, obviously, but to keep tabs on them. That Maoist Rebel News guy, he's a total ding-dong who's made some pretty embarrassing takes. And so I have no interest in supporting them financially or referencing them in any of my videos. However, at the same time, I have watched some of their videos. When half of BreadTube was making some video about Jordan Peterson, I was wanting to hear about Gina Haspel. Wait, you know who Jordan Peterson is, but you don't know Gina Haspel? Trump's appointed head of the CIA, Gina Haspel, a wanted war criminal? Well, guess who did do a video on her? The wonderful Step Back History, but also the Maoist Rebel News guy, and I watched both of those videos and found them very informative. Canceling doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. There are some folks and ideas that I would never platform or support, and some that I would engage with on my own time, but not platform. and some that I would discuss on my channel, but only after providing a caveat, and some that I would openly discuss. And there are a select few that I would financially support. Face to face. When it comes to IRL canceling, there are confirmable first-hand accounts of what took place. Even if folks may disagree about what actually happened and the intentionality behind it, the victim and victimizer, and at the very least, background folks who have first-hand accounts of what happened, they are known, personally known. One incident. In the IRL incidences, the events took place within a specific time. There is a fairly concrete who, what, when, and why. There is no discussion about patterns of behavior or out-of-context clippings of the events. The essentialism and presumption of guilt and abstraction that Counterpoints talked about in her video, they absolutely can take place in IRL canceling, but the degree of which this takes place is much different than online canceling. Ode engagement. And lastly, IRL canceling is fairly localized. There is not a lot of anonymity or outside influence, and the number of folks asking about the event is fairly small. There's basically a zero chance that anyone involved is an undercover police officer or neo-Nazi or troll or whatever, just trying to stir the pot. I can literally walk up to someone personally involved with the incident and get their side of the story. And also, and this is important, if I ask for some clarification, they can say, I don't want to talk about it. Online, on the other paw, is a totally different story. The inquiring person may be genuine, or a troll, or even a neo-Nazi or agent provocateur. Who knows? Not only this, but the expectation of a response, due to the sheer numbers, is a lot less practical. When there are hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people asking for an explanation, they aren't exactly owed one.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that, sure, canceling in the apolitical mainstream figures kind of sense probably has some efficacy. But, as demonstrated in the IRL examples, incidences that might invoke canceling tend to be very complicated with a lot of uncertainty and gray areas. And the anonymity and disconnection and scope of online canceling make expectations of capitulation simply ridiculous. This Twitter mob, purity testing, backbiting, left-on-left canceling seems to not only be ineffective at seeking redress, but also discounts the good work folks are doing, and makes the left look like some kind of walking on eggshells goddamn beehive that no reasonable person would ever want to be a part of.
I suppose I'll conclude with some advice. When it comes to online canceling activity, we must acknowledge two things. One, if you want to take to Twitter and levy your complaint, and you notice that 50 or 100 or 1,000 people have already levied that complaint, you might want to consider that complaint sufficiently levied. And two, no one owes you a response. No one owes you capitulation. And it's for all these reasons that I try to keep my canceling activities to IRL spaces. Those incidences are clearly difficult enough. Anyway, that's it. That's me, Radical Reviewer. Here's my patrons. Please, no one cancel me. I guess. More book reviews coming soon. I love you. Bye.
Walk by the empty faces that will never know, assured that we're the ones who got them pegged as they walk by and peg us just the same way. The world is a happy, peggy place. Yeah, and I'll be pegging you sometime tomorrow for pegging me that time last Saturday. And maybe next week I'll decide you're one of them. You're not a human anymore. You
machine that lives to do things. But I find amusing a schmuck for me to peg and throw